Welcome to Introduction to Financial Accounting. My name is Dina, and this session is brought to you by Illuminate Education and Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand. Today, we're going to discuss some core concepts around financial accounting. As you go about developing your business solutions as part of this challenge, it's incredibly important to make sure that the idea is viable in the long run, and part of this process is putting together financial forecasts. Now, I hope you're as excited about this challenge as I am, because this type of planning is what any new business would need to do to get an idea off the ground. Let's start off by asking ourselves, what is accounting? Accounting, in its simplest definition, is the process of recording financial transactions relating to a business. It's one of the core functions for almost any business. So when you think about your local cafe down the road, right through to large organisations listed on the stock exchange, accounting will be at their core. So what do accountants actually do? They're trusted partners who determine the strategy of the business. So for example, if a business wants to introduce a new product, the accountant will help determine the financial implications of that decision. Accountants also manage how businesses earn and spend money, and ultimately ensure that the business is operating as efficiently as possible. And this is really important because if a business gets into a situation where it's spending more money than it's earning, it could potentially lead to things like bankruptcy, and nobody wants that. Accountants work at some of the highest levels in organisations, and I'll share a few examples with you shortly. A chartered accountant is someone like myself, an industry professional who's completed the CA program, which gives them an accreditation and an internationally recognised postgraduate qualification. Chartered accountants have some of the most dynamic and highly regarded careers in the business world today. On the slide, we've got a few examples of chartered accountants, and you may recognise some of these organisations: World Vision, Australia Sailing, The Iconic, and what I can only imagine is an incredibly fun activity, Jetboards New Zealand. As you can see, accountants don't just work at accounting firms, but at all levels of business and even government. For many, becoming a chartered accountant is the first step towards becoming a partner, an entrepreneur, director, CFO, or even the CEO at some of the world's largest organisations. There are 121,000 chartered accountants across Australia and New Zealand, and they're using their skills to make a difference for businesses and communities all over the world. Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand have connections all around the world and actually form part of a global accounting alliance. What skills do you think chartered accountants should have? You're right in that it involves maths and numbers, but it's also so much more than that. There are some skills I have, as well as other chartered accountants around me, and these are skills that we continue to develop. Great communication and teamwork, and these really go hand in hand. It's about being able to communicate information well and accurately, and being able to work with others. Accountants will often work with other accountants, and they'll also work with other stakeholders inside and outside the business. Strategic thinking. So this is all about innovative thinking and planning for the future. Solving business problems. And the challenge you're doing at the moment is a great example of this, because you're essentially coming up with a business solution to a problem or economic issue in the community. Businesses, and particularly accountants, need to continuously solve problems and identify opportunities. They also adapt to change. I think if 2020 has taught us anything, it's the need to be adaptive. Things are constantly changing, so organisations and the professionals that work within them need to be able to adapt. Unique perspective and ambition to achieve the best. As an individual, you want to achieve your best, and you also want the business to reach its full potential. I introduced myself at the beginning, but now let me tell you a little bit more about my story. I work as a management consultant at KPMG. You might have heard of them. They're one of the big 4 professional service firms in the world. I've always been fascinated by accounting, especially as I began to realise that it was the driving force behind so many businesses. I like to think of it as the engine room of a business, so having a solid understanding and having my CA is such a huge advantage. On a day-to-day basis, I essentially help businesses solve complex problems and make improvements. For example, a business might need help in evaluating whether they should invest, say, in new equipment or upgrading their technology. So I help them evaluate whether this makes sense from a financial perspective, but also from a strategic and operational lens too. Some of my work is actually very similar to what you're doing in this challenge. One of the most exciting projects I've worked on was building a financial model for a startup that wanted to convert waste to energy. Having a CA under my belt has helped me develop the commercial know-how and a high level of analytical thinking. Doing a CA might be something you wish to consider down the track. For now, let's see if we can give you a hand with this challenge. I introduced accounting to you earlier. Financial accounting is all about measuring the money or worth of something, whether that be a person or an organisation. And we do this because we want to be able to provide relevant information to users to help them make decisions. Now, these users could be inside or outside the organisation, and it's about helping them assess performance so that they can make those decisions. As we're about to explore, accounting is all about the measuring of money so that the business can also make plans. And we do this using the basic blocks of accounting, which I'll introduce to you now. In order to measure the money or the worth for business, there are 4 key elements, and these will be really helpful as you build out your financial statements. The first is how much we earn, so what's coming in. The accounting term for this is income or revenue. For example, if I had a cafe, my revenue would be all the money I received from customers paying me for their meals and their drinks. Okay, so we've got money coming in, but we also have money going out. And this is how much we spend. We call these expenses. So my expenses for the cafe could be things like wages I pay the staff, rent, ingredients. You'll notice here that I need to spend money to make money. So my expenses actually help me bring in revenue. It's worth keeping this in mind. The next element is how much we own. And these are called assets. So our assets are things like the tables, the chairs, the coffee machine. Lastly, how much we owe are called liabilities. So to get started, my cafe might have taken out a loan from the bank. This is money that I now owe the bank, so it becomes a liability. These are the ABCs of accounting, if you like. So you'll notice these words will come up quite a lot. We spoke earlier that accounting involves measuring. And the things that we're measuring are the revenue, the expenses, our assets, and our liabilities. So how do we measure them? We measure them through financial statements. And there's 2 particular financial statements that I want to draw your attention to because you'll be required to complete them as part of the challenge. The first is forecasting establishment costs, and the second, profit and loss statement. Let's take a look at forecasting establishment costs first. When we say establishment costs, these are just as they sound. We want to measure all the costs involved in establishing and starting our business. It's a budget of everything you need to spend your initial investment on to make sure that we're ready to open our doors on day one. So this could include rent, furniture or fittings. It means buying the product or the raw materials if we're reselling or making something. There might be staff costs involved, including any training to bring your staff up to speed for day one. Think of everything you need to buy before you start doing business with your customers. So we're going to list the item, how much it is per item, the quantity, and then the total cost. So continuing with the cafe example, if I needed 10 tables for my cafe, the unit price is $100 per table, the quantity is 10, so the total cost for that item is $1,000. I then write all the other items I need for establishment. I'll add up my total costs, and this will then give me my total establishment costs. I encourage you to visit the link we've got on the page there. There's a helpful video that explains this further. It's important to do regular reporting of revenue and expenses in what we call a profit and loss statement. So remember from earlier, revenue is how much we earn and expenses is how much we spend. The difference between our revenue and our expenses is something we call profit or margin. There are some key terms that I want to bring you up to speed with before we go through an example. The The first one is costs of goods sold. Now, costs of goods sold are essentially the costs involved as we produce our product or deliver our service. You can think of these as variable costs, so they're costs that vary depending on how much we sell. Sticking with our cafe example, if I'm selling takeaway coffees, the variable costs would include things like the coffee beans, the milk. If it's a takeaway coffee, it will include the takeaway coffee cup cost. And you can check that all of these are variable costs because the more coffees I sell, the more cost I incur. The opposite of a variable cost is something we call a fixed cost, where regardless of how much we sell to our customers, the cost doesn't change. So a good example of a fixed cost is something like rent. I could sell 10 coffees during the month, or I could sell 1,000 coffees during the month, but I still need to pay the same amount of rent. So this is what we call a fixed cost. Gross profit is what we get when we deduct our costs of goods sold, which is our variable costs, from our revenue. This gives us what we call gross profit. Once we have our gross profit, we deduct our fixed costs, and this gives us what we call in accounting our net profit. This will make more sense once we look at an example, but just before we move on, a profit and loss statement is generally done on a monthly or a quarterly basis, and definitely on an annual basis. Let's take a look at an example. Let's take a look at a projected profit and loss statement using the cafe as an example. The first line is revenue of $600,000, so this represents the money coming in, what I'm earning from my customers who are paying me for their meals and their drinks. I might also charge customers a fee for a home delivery service, so that would be included in my revenue as well. The next step is to deduct my cost of goods sold. So this $300,000 represents those variable costs that we spoke about, things like the coffee beans, the milk, the takeaway coffee cups, any ingredients for my meals, etc. When we have our revenue and we deduct our costs of goods sold, we get our gross profit of $300,000. And in this case, it's a positive number, which is great, but we still haven't accounted for our fixed costs. So the next step is to deduct our fixed costs of $220,000. So this represents things like the rent, the advertising in the local paper, the staff costs, all the costs that are fixed. When we take our gross profit and deduct our fixed costs, we arrive at our net profit of $80,000. Essentially, what this is telling us is that our business made $80,000 from everything that we sold after we've taken into consideration our fixed and variable costs. And this net profit is a really important measure for businesses. A business might be so thrilled that they've made $600,000 in revenue, but if all their costs equate to $700,000, it means they're actually spending more than they're earning, which isn't a good thing in the long run. So hopefully all of your business solutions are profitable in the long run. For the challenge, you'll be required to complete a profit and loss statement to show all your income and expenses over the first year, broken down by months. So the first section is income, the rows in green, so split out your income categories to forecast accurately per month. We then have costs of goods sold in blue. Remember, these are our variable costs, so split into categories of purchases per customer. This gives us our gross profit, which is income minus costs of goods sold. We then have our operating expenses in red. Remember, these are our fixed costs, and make sure you budget expected costs across all areas of your business. And this gives us our net profit before tax, which is gross profit minus operating expenses. The next part is doing a cost-benefit analysis, and I do this a lot in my role as a management consultant. You'll need to discuss the costs your business has and the benefits and compare them. So the costs include things like the establishment costs and the ongoing costs. When we say benefits, we're talking about what your business provides. So what benefits will it have to you as the owner? What benefits will it offer customers and the community at large? Why should a bank or investor loan you money to start your business? So this is a written analysis, so you don't need to complete the table unless you really want to and have already written the paragraph. So you might be thinking, this is great. I understand that I need to forecast costs, but how on earth am I going to do that? And it's a great question. Just like in a real business situation, you'll need to do research. And here are some tips to get you started. Call people. and let them know that you're doing an educational program up front. You might also know people who run a business, so I encourage you to ask them. The internet is also a great resource, and as you do your research, make sure you take notes to help you track where information came from and in case you need to go back to it. In terms of researching operational expenses, which remember are our fixed costs, many businesses now provide informational quotes online or share their prices in promotional information. So to get you started, for bank fees, check your local bank and make sure you look up a business account. For loan repayments, see if there's an online loan calculator for this. And once again, make sure it's a business loan that you select. For insurance, many companies do have online quote calculators. In terms of rent, search commercial property rents online. For telephone and internet, many companies do have their plans online. For superannuation, this is typically a percentage of wages and salaries, so have a search online for what that percentage is. In terms of wages and salaries themselves, you might want to head to the Fair Work website to find out the minimum legal pay rates in Australia. A couple of other tips for preparing your financial statements. If you find that there's a category on the profit and loss statement that you don't understand, you do need to find out what it is, and the best way to do this is by asking someone or researching on Google. Secondly, Excel is a wonderful program and has become my best friend in my line of work, and I'm sure it will become yours too. Lucky for you, all the equations are already preloaded into the Excel spreadsheets. Lastly, Illuminate Education Australia has partnered with Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand to develop video resources and guides, so jump on the below link to have a look. Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand does have an online portal that's dedicated to students like yourself, so I encourage you to jump on there to read more information about the accounting and finance industry, to get career advice and listen to stories from experienced CAs, to get information on upcoming events and job opportunities like cadetships. Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand are on social media, and there's plenty of ways to engage. Head to Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube. That brings us to the end of today's session, and I really do hope you found it beneficial. We've touched on some core financial accounting concepts as well as financial statements to help you tackle your challenge. Best of luck.